These are my orders from Kingman back to Lincoln Army Air Base, which of course is only 20 miles from my home. I lucked out there again. Headquarters, Kingman Army Airfield, Kingman, Arizona, 19th of September, 44. Following name officers, Air Corps, have been graduated from co-pilot training. This station are released from attached unassigned section 1 3018 Air Force Base Unit and are then assigned and with pay 2nd Air Force C and RP Lincoln Air Force Base, Lincoln, Nebraska, 20th of September, 44, reporting not later than the 26th of September, 44, to CO thereat as members of Provisional Project as indicated. 2nd Air Force, 16, B-17, co-pilot, 924, Kingman, MOS 1051. 1051 indicates as a co-pilot. 1091 is first pilot, which I'll get later on. Second lieutenants unless otherwise indicated. Board D. Clements 0-784858. I'll add another arrow on this trip from Kingman back to Lincoln, Nebraska. That airplane there is the Queen of the Skies. The one that won the war, toughest old bird there was in the air. This one here is the Boeing B-17G Flying Fortress, nicknamed Chucky. This famous World War II bomber was used in experimental electronic research, manufactured in 1944 by Vega, serial number 448543A. Color scheme was done in 486 Bomb Group, stationed in Sudbury, England. You notice the square W on the tail. That was our bomb group. Engines, 4 Wright Cyclone GR 1820-97s. Wingspan 103 feet 9 inches. Length 74 feet 4 inches. Height 19 feet 1 inch. Maximum gross 65,500 pounds. Those engines were 1,200 horsepower piece, so that was 4,800 horsepower it had. This plane's out of Fort Worth, Texas. This is the Homesick Angel. It was at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, but now it's been moved to the Big Sac Museum west of Omaha. It's just about 15 miles from where I live at Elmwood. I was in this one when they were getting ready to restore it. This is a Sentimental Journey. It's a plane in the Confederate Air Force. These are some Confederate Air Force planes flying in formation. Very loose formation, I might say. This one's a B-25, B-17, B-29, B-24, I'm not sure about that one. These are two B-17s flying in formation. The front one, Texas Raiders. That's in, I think, in the West Texas wing of the Confederate Air Force. And the other one below is the Sentimental Journey, the Confederate Air Force. Did you ever see anything as pretty as those? This is a painting of a B-24 whose name Libra of Zodiac. It was in the 834th Squadron, 486 Bomb Group, Heavy, Station 1, Fort 74, Sudbury, England. This was always the age-old battle of which was the best airplane, the B-24 or the B-17, but I'm sure it was at 17 for where we were at, but our group went over to England in 24s and then switched to 17, but I'll get into that later when we get to the English part of it. The air base at Lincoln was a great big melting pot for all Air Force personnel. They'd come in from the gunnery schools and the engineering schools and the radio schools, pilot training, navigator training, and bombardiers, and some way or another they had it figured out how to put them together for crews. One thing we did notice that they never put two guys on the same crew from a real same proximity of their livelihood, because I don't know, I guess they figured, I don't know, they might click together or something, but they were assembled from all over the country. Don't remember much about Lincoln, but I know I don't think I even hardly stayed out there. We had places we could stay, but I spent most of the time at home, but driving back and forth, and most of the information would come up on the bulletin boards and what you had to do, but mainly it was a case of waiting around for your crew assignments. We got in there the 28th of September and left about the 26th of October. In my mind, it wasn't that long, but I guess the figures don't lie here. And start out with the crew here. This is Big Slim Hokum, we called him. He was from Texas, and he was our flight engineer, and he's also the upper turret gunner. And his area was right behind us. That upper turret was right behind us, and then he'd help us a lot with problems we had, and we had a little job of calling out airspeed and stuff when we were landing. Next one is Jim Wisely. He just passed away this summer, but he was our radio operator and also a waist gunner. This is Don Simmons. He was our armor gunner, and he was the one that armed the bombs and so forth, and checked the bombs before we took off, make sure they were armed. And he would, if we didn't have a bombardier, he would toggle the bombs at the proper time. This one here is Charlie Jones. Oh, Don Simmons was from Iowa. Charlie Jones, he was from Virginia, Clarksville, Virginia. And he was our ball turret gunner, and a little guy. It took a little guy to get in there. Ray Przinski, he was our tail gunner, and he was from Minnesota. Rod Hildebrand, he was our other waist gunner, and he was also from Minnesota. I think those were the only two that were from the same state. This Burt Ward, pilot, he was from Wichita, Kansas. Of course, that's me. This is Walt Kelly, our navigator. He was from Bay Minette, Alabama. Bob Goodwin is a bombardier, and he was from Salina, Kansas. And Bob Goodwin trained with us, but then he didn't go overseas with us because they started in with Mickey bombing or radar bombing, and the airplane didn't need a bombardier, but we did get a substitute, Bernie Ofriera, and he was from Michigan. He would fly with us when we flew as deputy lead of the group, or deputy lead of the squadron. Then Bernie would go with us. Now zoom in a little bit closer on these. That's Big Slim Hokum, Jim Wisely, Don Simmons, Charlie Jones. Went to visit him a couple years ago in Virginia, and he's in pretty tough shape. Ray Przinski and Rod Hildebrand. Burt Ward, myself, Walt Kelly, and Bob Goodwin. This photograph was taken at Alexander, Louisiana, where we're headed for next from Lincoln. Now here we are back on the map again. Went from Lincoln down to Alexandria, Louisiana. This is a copy of our orders from Headquarters, Lincoln Army Airfield, Lincoln, Nebraska, 24th of October, 44. Following officers and enlisted men and so forth are assigned to Alexandria, Louisiana, with pay, on or about the 26th of October, 44. Reporting upon arrival to the CO for duty. And it lists all the crews that were sent there at that time. This is our crew right here. And at that time we were assigned crew number 9367, which would hang with us for the rest of our tour. This is a booklet I got from Alexandria. Of course, this is where we took our crew training, and we went through all the process of a mission, and that's what we learned there. Everybody learned his own job here at Alexandria. This booklet has quite a bit of information of what we did there and what we did to learn to fly as a crew. Listen, here is the celestial navigation trainer. That would be Kelly, and that would be a pilot. And that was one of the trainers we went through there, training for him and for us both. This was a trainer for a bombardier. It was like an ordnance bomb site set up there, and it would move on the floor and simulate regular bombing missions, which give him a lot of practice. You heard me talk a lot about the link trainer. This was a link trainer. It was mounted up on here, and all hydraulic, would move. And this was a guy that was recording all your moves down there. It would just plot it out on the ground. And you'd get your grades when you got done. That was a setup for the top turret gunner. And he got practice right there on his gunnery. Because you can't see up above, you see a plane flying over for him to shoot at. That's the chin turret all rigged up there, and there's a guy running it. This guy up here, that's the chin turret, was right under the guy in the airplane. That would have been right in the bubble of the airplane, and he aimed from up there, and that automatically operated that chin turret. Plane flying by there let him track that. We had a regular briefing there, just like we were going on a mission, and got the maps up ahead of us on the wall there, and same thing we went through in England on the real thing. That's hauling ammunition out for the gunners for all the 50 caliber machine guns. That was the carriers for bringing bombs out to the airplane. Now those are 100-pound practice bombs that we used there. When they hit the ground, they put out a big puff of white flour and stuff so they could mark it, check it from the air and see how close you hit. That's the line of bombers, one of the lines of bombers there at Alexandria. Gunners carrying their ammo on. That's for their 50 caliber machine guns. They're carrying a camera aboard in training. There was a camera loaded in the bottom of the plane, and whenever they tripped the bombs, why, that camera started running, and that showed you exactly how close you came to your targets. It could take pictures of those flour bombs when they hit the ground. That's the radio operator at his desk. You can see some of the radio equipment that he had there. That picture of the waist gunner, and if you notice, on top of his 50 caliber machine gun was this camera operated, so they knew how good you did. When you came back, everybody got graded and checked out. And there was the bombardier sitting right up in that bubble. He's got straddling the Norden bomb sight between his legs there. That shows dropping the bombs. Now, those were dropped at a closer interval, but they call that one a tumbler. He got caught in a slipstream or something, and it tipped him, and they called him a tumbler. Now these were triggered at a little bit wider or longer interval, but those all came out real nice. That's the navigator at his little table up there in the nose. I guess I didn't mention we did travel by troop train from Lincoln down to Alexandria because there's a large group of us, and that shows us train getting loaded up to head back to Lincoln again right there. While at Alexandria was kind of uneventful, but I'll try to come up with a few things that kind of maybe stuck in my mind a little bit. One thing, there'd be no order to this stuff, but while we were there, I don't know, I think we were down in class one day, and somebody said there was a fire in one of the barracks, BOQ. When we got to be officers, they called them BOQs, but they were still old barracks, bachelor officer quarters. But sure enough, it was our barracks on fire. We run up there, and barracks were built in a H kind of shape like that. The fire started in the center of it, and our room was clear over in this corner. And of course they kind of let us out to go see it because we said it was our barracks. And the fire was just in this area, and we got over there, and they wouldn't let us go in that building. They absolutely wouldn't let us go in. They could have gone in. They had doors right in the end, right there by our rooms, but they wouldn't let us go in. So we lost every last stitch of clothing, and whatever we had was gone. And so that presented quite a problem. I know the night before it burned, I'd been down at the officers club, and they had slot machines there, and I'd hit a jackpot on nickels. And after the fire was all over, we went in and kind of dug around. I come out with a big handful of nickels. That was about the only thing that I could save. I believe I found a set of wings off of one of my uniforms, and I still have that set of wings. That really presented a problem for us because the only clothes we had were what we had on. And we went to our PX, and they were clear out, and finally we went down to Camp Polk, Louisiana, which was a large place, and we found a uniform, and I think that's where I had my blouse jacket remade into what they call an Eisenhower jacket. They cut off the blouse part of it and shortened it up, and we called them an Eisenhower jacket, but I thought it was a lot neater, flashier thing, and that's what I had. You'll probably show you eventually a picture of that Eisenhower jacket, which I still have. Of course, this was no different than any other place. We got flying checks, and they had check pilots on the base that would give us the checks. And one night we went up for a night flight. Here come the guy to give us a check, and before we took off, here a Jeep rolled up, and I can't remember if it was a bird colonel or not, but I think it was. And he was the one they sent around all the different the Air Force bases, and he checked out the check pilots. Well, of course, he got on our plane, and we went up, and I got out of the seat, and Bert got the first check ride, and he got through it all right and everything, and then it was my turn. Of course, Bert got out, and of course, when they gave you a check flight, I rode 90% of the time in training in the right-hand seat. And when I went for the check, well, they'd always put you over in the left-hand seat. Well, that made everything, you just weren't as proficient, I didn't think, because you used to run the throttle with your left hand and the stick or the wheel with your right hand, and it was just opposite when you got on the other side. Well, anyway, we got out. I taxied out and started taking off. I just got off the ground. Of course, both the check pilots were standing, and Bert all three of them were standing behind me there, and just got off the ground. I was just starting to pull up the wheels, and this local test check pilot, he reached up and pulled 3 engines on me. Just, the throttles were all there in a quadrant, and he grabbed 3 of them and pulled them back. And boy, I started through the procedure or the routine for that, and about that time, this other guy, the bird colonel, he jumped over there and he slammed those throttles back forward again. And if you ever seen an ass chewing, that pilot got one, that check pilot. He says, "Don't you ever do that to anybody, and especially when I'm along." He says, "This plane will not fly on one engine on takeoff, especially with the gear down." Boy, but he got it chewing. That kind of shook me too, but we went on through the test, and I felt pretty good because I come back in, and we had a little crosswind, and I think I greased in one of the best landings I ever made, and that's what this pilot told me. He says, "That's the best landing I've ever been in a B-17, and that really kind of made my day after all that. Bert and I never did agree on how to land a B-17 in a crosswind. He was from the old school, where you bring them in and put a crab into them, and so you go straight down the runway, and then just at the exact second you kick it out of that crab just before it pays off. Well, that's pretty hard to do in rough crosswinds. Sometimes you get it done and sometimes you don't. But I was taught to cross control, and that way you could fly with one wing down and keep the airplane straight by cross controlling. And then you'd come in and you'd touch one wheel down and then drop the other wheel down, and still kept it going straight the whole time. That way, when you did it the other way, a lot of times you didn't get it kicked out at the right time, and you'd hit with still in the crab, and that was kind of bad news. We did quite a bit of night, quite a few hours of night flying there, and when we got back from a flight, we'd pull her in, and our crew had to gas it up. The tank truck had come out, and one of our guys had to get up there and on the wing and put it in there and get them topped off. One night, Polak, it was Ray Brzezinski, we called him a Polak, was up there. He wasn't paying too much attention. Well, it run over and run down off the wing and onto the ground. And somebody down on the ground says, "Mister," he says, "watch what you're doing." And we had good discipline in our crew, but we were a tight-knit crew, and we did things our own way. And Polak thought it was Bert or I, and he said, "Why don't you jump up here and bite my ass?" He said. Well, it was the base commander. He was in his little Jeep running around and checking things, see what we did when we come in from a night flight. Needless to say, poor old Polak was down off of that wing, backed up against the plane, getting reamed out. And took Bert and I quite a bit of explaining to get him out of that one, that what kind of a crew we were, and we assured him that he had no idea who it was, but we got him out of it. But that's been a standing joke for a long time. We did quite a few navigation flights to give a navigator practice. We'd tie them in with practice bombing runs. They'd have a target out in the middle of nowhere, a big cross down on the ground, and the bombardier would have to zero in on it and drop the 100-pound flour bombs and see how he did. And of course, they were recorded. And we'd do the same thing at night, except rather than have a cross down there, it would be a cross of lights out in the middle of nowhere. Well, one day, we got a shipment into the base. Here was about 3 or 4 100-pound bombs that somebody crated up and sent them in. Well, it was some little town, and one of the bombardiers mistook that little town, the main crossing in town, as the target. And he did a good job. He put them right down the main drag. Nobody got hurt, but they had some flour bombs that they packed up and sent back. We didn't always go exactly where we were supposed to on navigation trips. Kelly was a good navigator, so it wasn't too awful far from his hometown of Bay Minette, Alabama, and so he said, "Let's go to that Bay Minette one day," and we did. He got a thrill out of that, flying over his hometown. We went fairly low altitude, and be darned if there wasn't a big pile of smoke coming out of there. And we went down, there was a house burning in his hometown, and we buzzed around there for a while. And he thought that was a good deal. I kind of remember one night we flew over in the Dallas, Fort Worth area, and Galveston. I kind of remember one thing is we always kind of wondered, we see these fires burning all over, and it was gas or oil wells, and they were burning the gas off of them or something, but those really stuck out like a sore thumbs, all scattered all over everywhere. And, Dallas and Fort Worth,
was really lit up, and the cities, and then you could see the big feeder highways between them with lights all connected to them, and that was kind of impressive for some young kids to see. In Alexandria, it was just another town. We went in there some, but there's kind of one place a lot of us hung out that was called the Club Almac. And when we got to England, we found some old boards and cut them up and named our barracks over there, our hut over there. We put Club Almac up over the door. Another rude awakening I got there at Alexandria. At dark, the colored folks were not allowed in part of the town, and boy, they were not supposed to be there. They were where they belonged. But I think we were in a taxi one night, and we were in a good part of the town, and we saw all these police cars, and they had kind of like a big paddy wagon, and they told them to stop, and we kind of watched what was going on. Well, cops pulled out about 4 or 5 young black gentlemen, and what I mean, they brought them out with their hands handcuffed behind them. They brought them up to this paddy wagon, and what I mean, they slammed them down in that paddy wagon face first, and that was really a rude awakening to a kid from the Midwest to see what was going on down there. But it was going on. They rode in the back of the buses and everything there, and there's no doubt about it. When we were taking just navigation flights and stuff, why, we did fly out over the ocean and the Gulf. I'm at the Gulf and down in there, and that was something for us to see too. And we thought we was really seeing the world. And of course, we had some practice gunnery flights there too. But we did everything that we were going to run into in combat there at Louisiana, we thought anyway. Guess that's all I can think of right now, but from there they shipped us back to Lincoln and get for preparation to be sent overseas. I'll add another arrow on that leg of our journey back to Lincoln. This is a copy of our orders shipping us from Alexandria, Louisiana, 15th of January, 1945. So-and-so to arrive in Lincoln at 20th of January, 45. There's a list of our crew. Now here's where we lost Bob Goodwin, the bombardier. They dropped him off of our crew right here when they sent us back to Lincoln. Those are listed in there as Second Lieutenant, 1091 rating is Burton D. Ward, first pilot. Second Lieutenant Boyd Clements is 1051 rating, second pilot. Second Lieutenant Walt Kelly, navigator. James Holcomb, engineer, he's a corporal. James Wisely, a corporal. Radio operator. Don Simmons, corporal. Armor gunner. Charlie Jones, corporal, gunner. Rod Hildebrand, corporal, a gunner. And Ray Brzezinski, corporal, is a gunner. Guess that's the first place I've noticed where it's given their ranks. Okay, on flying hours, we left Alexandria, and I had 428 hours and 5 minutes. Got a little more flying down there. Not sure, but I think I had this picture taken when I was at Alexandria and sent home. And I think this picture was taken at Alexandria, and I think it was taken at the Club Almac that I mentioned before. Of course, this is me, and this is a kid from Omaha, Don Knott, and this is Walt Kelly, the navigator. Here's a newspaper clipping I just found. I guess it got misfiled, but it should have been in the Kingman portion of this tape. Lieutenant R.A. Davis missing on plane. Lieutenant Richard A. Davis, co-pilot on a B-17 based at Kingman, Arizona, has been reported missing on a plane in Arizona since early Tuesday morning. The War Department notified his mother, Mrs. Henry Worley Worcester, 3326 R Street. Lieutenant Davis was a passenger on the missing plane. Searching parties were still hunting for the plane Wednesday. His wife, the former Betty Nash, is living with her parents. Mr. and Mrs. W. Ellis Nash, Jr., 1545 South 26th Street. Lieutenant Davis, a graduate of Lincoln High, where he was a member of the track team, enlisted in the Air Corps March 28, 43, and received his wings June 27th this year. He went to Kingman August 16th. Well, after we got all checked out at Lincoln and our teeth all fixed up and repaired, and I guess we were off to fight the battles, but we left there by troop train and headed to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. Lincoln to Camp Kilmer. It was right near New York. Well, I got this map up here. I'm going to show you where Charlie Jones lived. Right down in here in the hills in Virginia. And he was our ball turret gunner. You can see the proximity of there from where we were at Camp Kilmer. Well, we'll start out again. Well, wait a minute here. Gotta get my hat on. We have a little condo on South Padre Island right on the beach here, and that's where I've been working on this. I brought a box full of this old records I've been sorting through, and I've been working on this, and I got a couple next door to me from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and he's a World War history nut, and so he's been kind of interested, and he and his wife been critiquing this thing as I go along, and they haven't had too much to say about it, except they said, be sure and wear your hat. He says it looks a lot better. You look a lot better because it covers up your old worn, wrinkly face. And so that's what I just remembered. I sat down there and saw I didn't have it on. Anyway, we took the train to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and that was kind of a ho-hum place. We were just sitting around to be shipped overseas. But the good part of it was we got to go into New York City several times, and that was a lot of fun for the country boys. Went up some of the tall buildings and went in a lot of the big fancy hotels, just looking around in Times Square and Radio City, and of course there was a lot of people there and a lot of war people, and boy, Times Square would be crowded, you couldn't believe it, but it was a lot of fun. And went into a drugstore one night and was having a soda or a malt something, and got talking to a couple of young gals there, and they said that they sang a little bit with Woody Herman. They knew him real well, and I said, yeah, sure, but they took me over where he was playing. I can't remember, some ballroom there, and they introduced me to him, but they knew him, but they said they just got to sing with him now and then. Yeah, eventually we got our orders to ship out. I remember, and we went by bus. But a little incident happened that Bert and I didn't know about until after we were on the ship. Charlie Jones, our ball turret gunner, he was a little homesick, and we got to Camp Kilmer, and he lived, I showed you down there at Clarksville, Virginia. Now, I'll be darned if he didn't take off and hitchhiked his way down there. And he came in, the guy said that the enlisted man said he came in the back door of the barracks we were staying in when they were going out the front door, shipping out, and he came that close to being AWOL, but they never even told us about it. Of course, they stayed in different barracks than we did, but that was a close one for him and all of us, I guess. I can't tell you much about where we boarded or anything, but it had to be in the New York harbor area there someplace, because we went in at night and loaded up at night, and then we were on our way by that next morning. But we went over on the Mauritania. It was the third largest passenger vessel it was floating at that time, and it was quite a ship. We had about 8,500 troops on there. Of course, there was all kinds of troops going over. But the officers got to stay in the staterooms upstairs, and enlisted men were all down, I don't know how many, 6 or 7 or 8 floor decks down, and we had showers up there, or no, we had a tub, that's right, because we had pursers on board, and they were watching their water supply, of course, so when we told them we wanted a bath, they would go draw our bath for us, and we'd go take our bath, and that was it. But poor enlisted men down in the bottom, boy, they had it rough. Each of the officers was assigned duty to have to spend so much time down there, and for some reason I got left off the roster. The guys kept threatening me that they was going to tell them that I wasn't having to go down there, but they never did. But anyway, I did go down a couple times, and that was really bad news. They were all seasick. They were in hammocks, just probably 6 inches stacked up on hammocks between them, and practically all of them were sick down there. I suppose one got sick, and then they all got sick, but boy, you get smelled. You could skate from one end of that thing to the other. It was bad. I don't think I'd have lived through that, but it was bad. All our enlisted men all of us were issued 45 revolvers that we carried on missions with us. But all enlisted men, I don't know, somebody said, by gosh, they had all their barracks bags stacked probably in one area, but somebody said, well gosh, my 45's gone, and they started looking, and everybody checked, all their 45s were gone, but a lot of the ground pounders, we had thousands of ground pounders on there, and they found that out, and they were systematically, they went through all those the barracks bags and got all the pistols out of them, and had a big to-do about it. So they had a big shakedown. They didn't find one pistol, so the guys didn't want to get caught with them, so they all must have gone out the portholes and down in the ocean. That was really a waste. Too bad that happened, but it did. Oh yeah, getting back to the baths, we'd sneak one of our enlisted men up, get him in our stateroom, get him undressed, and then one of us would go tell him we wanted to have a bath, and they'd give us a towel, and we'd go in and give it to our enlisted man, and he'd go take a bath then, and back they couldn't tell whether we were the officers or not without any clothes on, so we got most of them, I think, because I remember most of them at least one bath on the way over. I think if I remember right, we were on the ocean about 9 days. Seemed like an awfully long time, but we took a route. We went out in the Atlantic and then headed way south and then across and then over by Africa and up by the Mediterranean, up that way. They said that way they could avoid the submarines. The submarines were all waiting out in front of all around England, and that way we made it without any mishaps. We did have all kinds of drills where they have to get all the troops up on the deck and everything. Of course, we had to go through all the lifeboat drills and all that stuff, but thank goodness we didn't have to use it. We landed at let's see, good for that. One other little event I remember, I had my 20th birthday, the 20th of February, and on the way over to England. So I thought I was really a man then. I was 20 years old. We landed at Liverpool, England, that's up north, and then we were bused down to our air base. I think maybe we stayed overnight there when we landed, and then we were bused down to Sudbury, England, 486 Bomb Group, 833rd Bomb Squadron, and they called it that air base Station 174. I think maybe I'm going to hold on this for a while and maybe finish it up at home, because I've got more material there as far as what we did in England and everything. And so hopefully I can get going on and have enough time to do it again at home before too long. So, to be continued. Yeah, we're back in Elmwood, hopefully getting ready to go to Padre again pretty soon, but our local church is having another dinner and a service to honor all the veterans of our church and community. They wanted us to bring a lot of just memorabilia, uniforms and so forth, what we'd have during the service. So I got some uniforms and stuff out. I thought I'd just take quick shots of them and put them on this tape. I had a foot locker I put in the attic over 50 years ago, and it's been up there probably in 120 degrees and 40 below in the wintertime. I opened it for the first time a couple nights ago, and everything was in relatively pretty good shape. I had to press them up a little bit, but this is my summer uniform. And of course the hat that goes with it. When we got our commission and were flying, all the guys that were flying status, we took the band out of our hats, so we had a crushed look. We had them kind of beat down like we were hot shots, I guess. This is my regular winter blouse. I didn't wear it too much because we all kind of opted for the Eisenhower jacket we had. We'd buy a blouse like this and then have it cut down, shortened up, and we thought they were more comfortable, and we really liked those. But I still had to have one of these. This one you could wear either with the same green pants, or we had the pinks that with them. But after the war I was so hard up I wore the pinks to live with, so I wore those out. This is the winter cap that goes with it. This goes with the regular blouse and of course the Eisenhower jacket also. This is a little better close-up of the summer hat. This is the Eisenhower jacket, we call it. It's a blouse cut down again and tailored to fit. And it was real comfortable. This one has the hardware on it. I did short of hardware for the others. Of course, this is the 8th Air Force shoulder patch. And we wore the U.S. and the wings, little wings and propeller designated the Army Air Force. There's my sterling silver wings that you get when you get out of pilot training. And let's see, looking at this backwards. This is a presidential citation the whole group got. This here is a European theater with 1 star on it. And this is the Air Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster on it. I mentioned this here while I got it out. This is my brother's blouse. He was in the combat engineers, a 2nd lieutenant. He had 37 men in his platoon, and he was the youngest one of the group. But they really liked him, I guess, from all the stories I heard about it. He was killed in Mindanao defusing a landmine. Earlier, he was awarded the Silver Star for wading out into a stream and oversaw the building of a bridge, pontoon bridge, to evacuate a bunch of wounded soldiers. This is another jacket I'm kind of proud of. 5 or 6 years ago, the aluminum overcast, that's a B-17 that flies out of the Experimental Aircraft Association at Oshkosh, Wisconsin, was going around the country and giving rides and letting you fly the plane for $500 while you could take the ride and fly the plane for about 20 minutes. All my family and kids and grandkids bought me this ticket, and they said that was my Christmas and birthday present for a couple of years, but I surely enjoyed it. And with the deal, we got this flying jacket, similar to the ones that we've used in Europe. I'll take it off, show you the different insignias and what they mean. This symbol here is of the Experimental Aircraft Association out of Oshkosh. That was the symbol that was on it with my name and name tag and wings. On this shoulder, I put the 8th Air Force patch and the 486 Bomb Group patch that consisted of 4 squadrons, 832nd, 833rd, 834th, and 835th. I was a member of the 833rd Bomb Squadron of this bomb group, Sudbury, England. And this shoulder is a regular Air Force patch, shoulder patch. And that Heritage Tour of '94 is when it was, when this airplane toured around the country. Okay, the other patch on the front is our 833rd Bomb Squadron insignia. called Bat Out of Hell, holding a 50 caliber machine gun in one claw and a bomb in the other. On the back, very beautiful embroidered B-17. Have that very straight. This is back when I fit into these uniforms pretty nice, about 15 pounds lighter than I am now. And this is the one in my winter uniform. This is a picture of my granddad, C.D. Coontz, on my mother's side. He was in the Civil War and had a pretty tough go of it, I guess. He was an aide to President Lincoln for a while, and I do have his Civil War pistol, which I treasure, and it has a belt, buckle, and a pearl-handled knife. Poor picture because of the reflection on the glass, but this is an old antique frame. This is the pearl-handled knife that he carried in his belt. This is what it slid into. The belt just broke off where it hooked onto his belt. And this is his pistol and his belt. There's a big old belt buckle that's on it. It snapped into this loop here. Yeah, this is his pistol. Of course, this is the holster. Pretty nice old gun. The only thing wrong with it, the top of the trigger is broke off. It looked like it had been brazed on once, but I suppose that could be fixed somewhere or another. It's no muzzle loader. Take that off and load your shells and tap them in there and put your cap in and so forth. I'd hate to be doing that when somebody was shooting at me. But anyway, that's it. And on the top it says Beals patent September 14th, 1858. Manufactured by Remington's. Let me see. Is it Lyman, New York, something like that. Anyway, it's made under Beals patent, but it was made by Remington. Interesting part of it, down here, I don't know if you can see them or not. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 notches filed in there. I don't know what that's for, but Mom always said that Grandpa told her that he had 8 horses shot out from under him during the war. But I really prize that. That's going to stay in the family one way or another. Couple other things while I got them out here. This is my brother's Purple Heart medal. And this is his Silver Star medal. I don't know whether I had this in Texas and put it on there or not. This is my air medal with one oak leaf cluster on it. Hope. Well, things would usually start at the officers' club. I don't know where the enlisted men, I guess they had their meeting place, but on the mantel there at the officers' club, they had a mug. When that mug was upright, well, you could drink, but if they walk in there and turn that mug upside down, that means the drinking was stopped and you all headed for home because you were on for flying. It was a mission the next morning. So that was our first go around. In the morning, depending on when the mission was, early or late, like 2 o'clock, early as 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, they'd come and they'd send somebody around. They knew every crew that was flying and come into your barracks and kick you out of bed. And they made sure everybody was up before they left so that somebody wasn't straggling. And from there we'd head over to the mess hall and you'd chow down, but it didn't take us long to learn that you didn't drink much in the morning, as you can probably figure out later on. But after we chowed down, then they usually had some these dual tandem trucks, open trucks. You'd pile onto those, and it was cold. I don't know, it really wasn't that cold, but it was a damp cold over there. It was cold the whole time it was over. And they'd haul you out to the flight line. No, they'd take you over to the briefing building and dump you off there. Briefing, you'd sit around until the big boys come in, and first thing they'd do, they'd have you hack your watches, which is you'd all had wristwatches. They wanted everybody exact same time because timing was very critical in the mission. So they'd give you time and you'd set your watch to that exact time that they told you. And when it got to that, well, they'd say 1 or 3, 2, 1, hack, and then you would punch it and start your clock. So everybody's watches were hacked at exactly the same time. Then they'd had a big map in the front of the room and they'd have it covered up. They'd go pull the strings on that map, and that showed your mission, where you were going that day. And you could see the route and so forth. And of course, sometimes there'd be a lot of ohs and ahs. A bad mission, or they thought it was bad, and altitudes and stuff. But and then they'd start going over that mission with you. It would pass out a sheet to everyone. I know you won't read it or be able to see it, but it gave all the information for that particular mission. Up here was Buncher 22, that's group assembly at 3,000 feet. The wing assembly was at 3,000 feet, and it gave you 2 locations at those, and you have to be to those at a certain time. Division assembly, like that one was at Southwood, and the time. And there's the time you go over the English coast, headed out. That's the time you'd hit the enemy coast, and at that time you started your climb. And this other locations and the time you had to be to them. IP, that's the initial point. That was the initial point where you started your bomb run. You're all lined up and you headed for the bomb drop. At that altitude, and there we were at 25,000 feet on this particular mission. And after the target, you did
the whole group would start down. They'd peel off and really speed up, and they would drop down to 8,000 feet by the time they got out of there on that mission. Rally point, in case everybody was shot up, and sometimes the squadrons would split off when we were bombing. That was your rally point. You all got back together by that place there, and that was still at 8,000. We leave the enemy coast time. There it says descend to minimum, but that whoever was leading the formation would set that altitude. They could set whatever they wanted to. English coast time, the time you're back to the base. Coming on down here, we had several radios on our aircraft. This division VHF radio, that call letter was Razorback for that day. Division 1 recall, if they could recall the whole division, the Arkansas Gazette, Wing VHF Authenticator, California. Wing recall, the Blue Horizon. Bomber call sign, Vingrove 25. Fighter call, that's it, wanted to call fighters in. That was Balance 2-2. Third fighter section was Oilskin, and 8th Air Force Fighter Grand Sector was Colgate. And the different sectors, you would have different call letters or call words to get their attention. That way the Germans wouldn't know who was talking to who. And the lead squadron on a mission was Hotshot William. That was the first lead squadron. And Hotshot William High, that's the one in the V. He was the second one. He flew a little bit high. And low squadron, he would fly the V, and one was high and one low, right on the lead plane. And these are all some of the different radios with contacts with everybody, and some of the different planes would have to guard a different channel. B channel guard gives the aircraft pilot's name there. Leach and Gibbs guarded that channel. And C channel guard for fighters was 3 different pilots there. In other words, that pilot would stay on that and report in to the others in our group if they had anything that was going on. When we were in trouble and so forth, if you got shot up and had to leave and you were trying to call for help and stuff, these were geographical reference points. If you call out a W, they would know you were near Coburg. R is Leipzig. E is Dresden. T is Carlsbad. E is Plauen or something like that. O is Tabor. S is Pisen. That way, if they were coming to send fighters to help you home, why, that's where you'd tell, they'd know where you were at. Every plane had berry pistols, what we called them. They were a little short pistol with a big barrel on them, but you shot flares out of them, and on top of the airplane, right behind the pilot and co-pilot, our flight engineer would shoot them, but they had different colors that meant different things. Green, red is our group. You would use that for assembly. I'll get into that later. Red is IP, is visual. That means that you're coming up onto the bomb run and the target was a visual. And yellow, that was PFF. That was a new Mickey bombing, radar bomb sites. You'd go in and bomb off the lead plane. They had a radar bomb site in one plane. Red bombs away. Red, yellow, change of target. Say you missed that and didn't get lined up or something, and so they'd shoot that, and you'd stay in formation and go to the next auxiliary target. Green, fighter aid, RR, abandoning mission, RR, wounded. When you come back to the field, if you had a wounded aboard, you got to go in first. Normally you'd peel off in order and go in line, but you had red, well, you got to go in first. Yellow was start to peel off when you're circling over and the first guy starts to peel off to go in and land. These are ground signals when you're lined up ready for takeoff. A mortar, that lets you know, get on your radio and listen to what's going on. Usually it was a standby to hold up for a while before you took off. And green means that somebody was making an instrument ascent to get out of the way. Red, that's when we were lined up. That would be a mission scrubbed. But usually if they were just going to delay a mission, they'd tell you to stand by, and then they would give you the green, just one green light, and that would be takeoff. Each of the squadron in the group, there's 4 squadrons, each had a, when you called up in your name, but each one had a name. The 833rd Bomb Squadron, our call letter was Pebbly. We always, Pebbly, I forgot the number of our plane. I thought I knew that. But you'd give your name Pebbly and your number. And these are approach to. Those are mainly the navigator had to knew where those were and had to get their timing right and so forth. And they were all control points trying to get. When you get 2,000 planes in a row, it really touchy on timing. Chaff. I'll get into that, but that tells the group when the guys in the waist would throw out the aluminum chaff, and that tells you when to do it. 2 minutes before IP for 15 minutes. That's calling for emergency aircraft. That's extreme only, it says. Russian recognition signals. Basic rock wings, second red flare. That's in case you got shot up and it was closer to Russia, you'd head there to crash land. On the back side of this sheet, this shows the formations. Now this is the lead squadron right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 planes in that lead squadron. This they call the high squadron. The lead squadron is here. The high squadron flew just a little bit higher, so your wing was almost touching or right above the plane next to you. And this is the low squadron. They flew to the left and back, so their wings were tucked right up under the wings of the other place. And this is the low squadron. They filled out this box formation, and they would fly just below. So you couldn't fly at the same level because of prop force. You had to stay at one high. The lead was there, high, low, and low, so to avoid prop force. This is one of the early missions. We were flying, there was lead, and we were flying the third plane back right here on the low squadron. When you were new, the new crews, you had to kind of work your way up because they didn't know how good a formation flyer and stuff, and you were graded all the time. And if you were a good crew, you got to work your way up because it was best to be up farther in the squadron. You didn't run out of gas quite as quick as the ones up in front, and I'll explain that later. That's what they did in briefing. They went over that whole thing, plus showing you the map of where we were going. And then they would, of course, ask any questions, and if they hadn't done a good job, why they would explain it. You also got this map where you were going, and we're leaving England over here, across the channel, and then the arrows go, we'd take this route in, and there's Dusseldorf right down there, and Osbruck up there. I can't quite see these, but anyway, that's where our bomb was. That's the first priority visual right there. Then we came back on the same route, and then we switched off and took another route over, and then the same route back to England as we came in. But if you see all these little puffy places, that's all the flak areas, and they try to route this thing in so you'd miss the worst flak. The flak areas around all the big cities. See, there's one around Castle, and that's the idea of that. Of course, there was a big area here, but I guess they figured that was the best way and shortest way to get there. You can never trust these maps because they had lots of guns mounted on flatbed railroad cars, and their intelligence was very good. When they knew where we were coming, they'd roll in a bunch of those guns in the area where they knew, on the railroad where they knew we were coming over, and suddenly you'd be grabbing for your flak suits and your flak helmets when you didn't think you were going to need them. Well, after briefing, they'd load you up again and take you out to the flight line and dump you off at your plane. Usually our enlisted men and crew was out there before we got there because they didn't have as much at briefing. And they'd already pulled the props through. You have to pull the props through several times, turn the engines over, because in a radial engine the oil may run down and fill up one of the lower cylinders. And if you turn that plane over without pumping that oil out of there, it'll blow the whole cylinder right off of it. So they had to pull them through several times before you dared start them. We had to wear quite a bit of equipment and hook up a lot of equipment and stuff when we went on a mission. I'll kind of go through some of the things that I think about right now. We wore a regular flight suit, kind of like a jumpsuit. Had some little pockets down on the legs and arms. It seemed like they had pockets all over. You never used many of them, but we did have a little plastic thing that was inside of it was an American flag folded up in there, and with some Russian writing on the back of it in case you got in trouble and had to head for Russia to crash land or try to set it down, or they shot some holes in your gas tank and you wouldn't make it home, so you'd headed that way. We never had to, but that way the Germans had already captured some B-17s and they were flying them over Russia and raising heck with things, so they didn't trust you at all. So you'd land, and that's the first thing you did. You grabbed that flag and waved it at them. And the story was that one crew went over there and crash landed, and they were surrounded by Russian troops, and they just tried to question them, you know, and they asked something in German. This one kid had taken German and knew a little German. He answered them, and boy, what I mean, I guess they killed several of them, just beat them up before they finally convinced them that they weren't a German crew. First, we wore an electric flying suit. We put that on over our flying suit, and it had two pieces, one the pants and then a vest type, but the pants kind of like an overall, but it had electric, kind of went up your back, and then you put your top half on and it had electric, and they said, well, boy, what's the deal? It gets hotter right in the middle of your back. And they said, well, you'll figure that out, because I guess they learned from the Russians, because they were such good winter fighters, that if you can keep your backbone extra warm, it'll keep your whole body warm. And that was the reason for that. And of course it went clear down, and then we had heavy boots that we put on over the flying suit. And we just took our shoes along. We tied them together and had them close in case we had to bail out. You're supposed to grab those shoes and take them with you, besides putting on your parachute and everything. But
You had electric flying gloves, and they plugged in onto the suit when you got them. They were big, heavy things. And underneath those, we wore a tight-fitting nylon glove that we didn't take off, of course, at any time. But the temperature up there would get 50 below zero, and there's no heat in those planes. So you had those nylon ones so that if you grabbed your steering wheel and different controls that were metal, that you didn't freeze to the controls. On top of that, you put on a Mae West, which was a flotation device with a little CO2 tube in the corner of it. It went on in front of you with straps over you, and that went on next. And if you had to bail out, well, then you could puncture that, pull that little CO2 thing, and it would automatically inflate. And we wore we had chest pack parachutes, and we had to put the parachute harness on. We wore all the time, and it had snaps up here. But the chest pack itself, we put down under the seat of the airplane. We were supposed to be able to grab it if you were in trouble, and grab that thing and get it snapped on to your suit. And because we had too much other things. We did also had a flak suit that we would put on when we got into flak areas, so you couldn't have that chest pack on at all. This flak suit was a big, heavy suit that went over you and just kind of dropped over you, but it had this big area in the front of it. It was all full of steel, overlapping pieces of steel, so it would bend and everything. We thought that was hot stuff, but really it wasn't quite. We found out they weren't as good as we thought they were going to be. While I'm talking about the flak suits, after you got shot at a couple of times, you realized they weren't kidding. We went up in the nose, up behind the back of the instrument panel, and we gathered up some extra flak suits and stuck them back up in there. That would protect the instruments. That's what we said, but also it might stop the flak from coming through from the front and getting us. On the back of our seats, they added a steel plate. I can't remember, probably maybe 3/8 steel plate that went down the back of our flying seat and went up as high as the top of your head, so it'd protect you from flak from the rear. Of course, we had to have a microphone, so we wear a throat mic that went around our neck, and two little mics that fit on your throat, and you had to plug that in when you got on. When you talked on it, on your steering control, you had a little button up there. You'd just push that button to turn the mic on and off. Of course, we had to have an oxygen mask. We had a hookup right beside you there. You had to put on your oxygen. We didn't put the oxygen mask on usually until 10,000 feet. You really didn't need it bad until 12, but that was just kind of standard procedure. And it had a hose. You had to plug that into your receptacle on there, and you could set that receptacle at automatic or pure oxygen. And normally you'd run it in the automatic position because it would adjust at whatever altitude you're at is how much oxygen you would get. And of course you had to have headphones. That you had to get plugged in. Of course we had several radios in the cockpit, plus our radio operator had several back in the waist. But whoever was flying the plane, he was usually listening on the radio that we had contact with the group and listening for instructions and so forth from the group. And the other guy that wasn't flying, he would monitor the crew. And we made our crew stay on all the time so that we could give them instructions. And also, whoever wasn't flying would check on the crew. Just have a crew check, and they had to come in and say that they were okay, because if they'd get unhooked or got their oxygen shot off or something, they didn't know it, they wouldn't answer, and we'd send somebody back to check on them. And normally if we would have had to bail out, which we never had to, we would have got unbuckled and unhooked from all this paraphernalia we had. We'd had to grab our parachute from under the seat and then drop down through a hatch, and there's an opening right down in that portion of the plane down behind the flight deck up there. We'd gone out the bottom right there. There's a little hatch too. Some guys would get hung up there and spill their chute right there as they're going out of the plane, and if that happened, yeah, usually the chute hung up on the tail assembly and they never made it. We normally had a 10-man crew: navigator, bombardier, pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer who operated the upper turret, and a ball turret gunner, a radio operator, and the radio operator would operate one of the waist guns, and we also had another waist gunner and a tail gunner, so I think that makes 10. But with our crew, our plane had a bunch of equipment in, they call it spot jamming. The Germans would have gun signals and get locked onto us, and they could really get you shot down. So these spot jammer guys, they'd sit there and dial across the dial, and they'd pick up one of the gun signals, and they'd send another signal out and jam that signal. But I'll tell you a little more about that later. But when we weren't flying deputy lead, why, usually we didn't take a bombardier along with us. But when we did fly deputy lead, we took another a bombardier with us, and I think we got Bert Ofiera flew with us. We kind of started calling him part of our crew because he flew with us every time we needed a bombardier. And if the lead plane got shot down and we took over the lead, then he would have to hit the target with a Norden bomb sight, which of course was impossible if we were above the clouds, and we'd have to try to figure out another target. We'll back up here a little bit. When they turned that jug over and said we had a mission the next morning, the armament squadrons, they had to go to work right then, and they had to work all night and load all the planes with a type of bombs particular bombs that they wanted for that mission, and how many, and that was all determined by how far the mission was. More bombs we could take of a short mission, and less gas, and vice versa. But they'd work all night and get those planes loaded so that they're ready to go in the morning. And they sure hated to see a mission scrubbed, because if a mission was scrubbed in the morning, they had to stay up and keep working all day and unload all those bombs, because if the mission the next day might be different and they'd need different bombs, so they'd have to get those all out. And if another mission, they'd have to spend that next night all night long loading the planes for the type of bomb they wanted on that mission. So those guys, you have to take your hats off to them. Well, after you was in the plane and everybody's in and settled down, why, they would call you on the radio and tell you when to start engines, and you had a big checklist. We'd go over, one guy'd read the checklist and the other would do it all. But it was quite a long checklist of checking everything's to do so you didn't forget one thing. We made one boo-boo that nearly cost us one time. I'll get into that when I get to that mission, I think. But and you got all ready, and then when they said start engines, why, the whole gang would start them up, and then you'd taxi out and get in line, similar to the position of what you were in the bomb group. So the first guys got off first, and then the last ones got off, but we're in the low squadron. But you'd all taxi out there, and they'd give you the green light, and the way you'd go one at a time. You had to have an interval, a little interval, I've forgotten what time it was, but not too long, so that you didn't run into any prop force from the plane ahead of you. That was a real rude awakening, my first takeoff on a mission, because in the United States, all the training, every engine, every manifold pressure, every prop RPM, everything was redlined at a certain place, so you were not supposed to fly them over that because that would wear them out too fast. Well, it was a lot different over here, where you had a full bomb load, full gas load. Everything went clear to the firewall. You pushed the throttles clear to the firewall, the prop pitch, everything went clear to the firewall. And I'm telling you, I never realized that those old birds could shake and vibrate and shimmy and everything, but you had to have it for takeoff. If you lost an engine on takeoff before you got your gear up, it wouldn't fly. I mean, you were going in probably, so you held your breath on every takeoff that old bird would keep churning away. Because they had them figured right down to the, I don't know, real close to what they would fly with and what they wouldn't, because they wanted as big a load going and as far as you could go. There's one guy that happened before we got there, but he lost an engine on takeoff, and they plowed him and it blew up, and the pilot was the only one that lived out of it, and they said he was laying a straddle of a 500-pound bomb clear out in the open by himself, and whatever saved him, nobody ever knew. After you took off, why, Kelly would try to get us to they'd give you an area rally point for our group. And that's where you'd get together and get in your own formation. But that was a booger, I'll tell you, when you took off before daylight. And that's where we'd come in with the berry pistols. Each group had a color for their, I think ours was red and green, or red and, I can't remember what. Anyway, our group had a certain berry color. And Big Slim, he'd fire those, and we'd all look, and pretty soon you could see somebody where the group was ahead of you forming up, and you could finally spot them and go fall into your position in the formation. But condensation trails were the real bugger over there, where you have 2,000 planes in a little bitty area over England trying to assemble and putting out all kinds of contrails. It gets solid, it gets so clouded and covered over that you can't see, and that's real bad at night when you got that many planes flying around there. And that's also the reason on that briefing sheet it gave an altitude for your group. In other words, they had the different groups at different altitudes. That helped a lot. I know one mission it got so bad that we never did find our group, so everybody was having trouble, so we just hooked on to another group and went over with that group. But it gets pretty scary when that soup starts to build up from those contrails, and you start hitting prop forces from other planes, and you want out of there real bad. I never did see any figures or read any figures on mid-air collisions on assembly, but there were a bunch of them. Everybody on our crew had his own job. We kind of started up front. The bombardier, of course, his job was to drop the bomb, but he was also running the chin-turn gun a lot. And when we didn't have him along, with no bombardier, then our armored gunner, Don Simmons, would come up and take over that gun, and he would toggle the bombs at from the signal from the lead plane. I'll get into that later. But then when we got to the bomb run, Don had to go back into the bomb bay. I don't know if he did it with the bomb bay doors open, but at the last minute he had to hang out over that bomb bay in there, and the bombs had little propellers on the front of them that were installed, so when the bomb dropped, that propeller would spin and come off and arm the bomb so it would go off. Otherwise it wouldn't go off when it hit the ground. But those had little pins or wires, we called them, and he had to go in there and crawl around on that little catwalk in there with just a rope holding him and with no chute, and pull those pins out of those bombs at the last minute, because we didn't want them armed. If we had to crash land or anything, we didn't want those suckers armed. So that was Don's job. Kelly, he was a navigator, and he was a good one. I think that's why we got picked, mainly because of Kelly, because of his accurate navigation, and they took tests and qualified all the time. That's why they picked us for a lead, deputy lead. Later on, they wanted us to go take off a few weeks and take lead crew training, but that's another story. We'll get into that later. But we didn't do it, and of course, Bert and I were the two pilots. We switched off. He was head lead pilot, and I was in a co-pilot seat most of the time. And Big Slim, he was our flight engineer. He's the one that was in charge of the plane. He would check it over and check the plane. We made a little inspection ourselves each time, but we depended on him to look that plane over good before we left in the mornings. And then any problems, something wasn't working, we'd holler at him, and he knew, quite knowledgeable, what could be fixed and what he could do to keep the thing going. And going back to Kelly, to Wisely, he was our radio operator, and of course he was a waist gunner when nobody was talking on the radio when they were needed with guns. But he had some big radios back there, and they were big, powerful radios. He could talk clear to the base back in England. They weren't supposed to unless they had to break radio silence. And but he did that in case had to leave, slowed down and had to leave the group. Why, you had to talk your way back and let them know where you were, or they'd shoot you down when they come over England if you didn't give out the proper call signals for the day. And go back to Rod Hildebrand. He was the other waist gunner. That was his job, to run the waist guns, one side or the other, or whoever was there. And down in the ball turret was Charlie Jones. His job was to run that turret, but that's all he could do once you got in there. It took a little guy to get down in that thing, but I don't think I could. I had claustrophobia in that, but he was a good one. And Ray Brzezinski, he was our tail gunner. And he was all by himself back there, kind of hunched down and halfway laying down back in there. But he did have a little door right beside him that he could open and bail out. That was one good part of it. It was real easy for him to get out if he'd had to. When we got into formation, we flew a pretty loose formation until we got across the channel over Europe. But from then on, boy, the group that could fight or fly the tightest formation, they were least apt to get attacked by fighters. Kind of to explain it, the tighter you could get together, and each plane had about 10 50 caliber machine guns in it, and 40 planes, that'd be 450 caliber machine guns shooting at a plane as he approached that group. And of course, if this group was all scattered out and spread out, he could pick out some guy out to the edge and go after him. But when you were a real tight formation, they didn't like that, because they had 400 gunners spraying bullets or 50 caliber bullets at him, and somebody was going to get lucky when you had that many of them. He was going into quite a bed of lead, so they left us alone. And so that's what they always preached was, your group was always. And I think we had one of the better groups as far as formation. We didn't have much fighter problem, because that stage of the war, the fighters were pretty well knocked down, and they would just pick out the stragglers. They'd wait till somebody got slowed down and couldn't keep up the group and had to pull out, and they'd pick on him and get him in a hurry. The Germans were way ahead of everybody as far as
aircraft, except of course when the P-51 come in, it was the best fighter, prop-driven fighter. But they had the jets, ME-262s. They had a few of them, and they hit the group. I believe it was the second group ahead of us. They'd sit up in the sun, and they'd come down and go right across the squadron, and guys couldn't even get a shot at them. They were so fast, and they knocked some planes down. We could hear them talking over their radios when they were getting hit. But there were stories about how many got shot down by just going over them one time, but I never did hear any verification of it. We did see them. The guys spotted them several times. I guess I never mentioned when we were talking formation flying. That was a very strenuous and tedious job because, boy, you had to hang in there real close, and there were a lot of planes that had mid-air collisions and lost planes. But that's the only thing you could do is keep your eye on that plane and keep it tucked in there real tight. Wished I'd had a video camera with me in those days. It was really beautiful up between the clouds and up in thunderstorms, looking at thunderstorms. And I think the one thing I remember, the prettiest thing I ever saw, we went into Germany kind of in the north route and then came back a little farther south. And we were evidently over Switzerland, and the Alps mountains were sticking up through those billows clouds, and the afternoon sunshine was shining on those mountains, and it was just something you'd just never seen before in your life. It was really something to see. Some of this stuff's kind of all mixed up, but I just tell as I think about it. Our plane has an autopilot. You'd set it up, and it would fly the plane, and but it was run by some gyros in there, and that's what would keep everything level. But ours has a little glitch in it. You'd be going along so nice, and all of a sudden it would just take off and wing over, and you had to watch it. You couldn't go away and leave it because you had to kick it out the minute it started to do that. We'd write it up, but they never could find anything wrong with it. The autopilot, and of course, we practiced bomb runs and stuff. We never had to use it over there. But when you'd get ready to go on a bomb run, we could hook it up, and I don't remember, push all the right buttons, but it would hook the automatic pilot to the Norden bomb site. So the bombardier, when he was up there cranking the little dials to make it on his bomb run to drop the bombs, he was actually flying the plane and making the turns. We'd get it on a straight and level path with the bomb site, and then he would make the turns whenever he turned the knobs on that way he'd look through the bomb site and kill the drift for wind drift and so forth, and drop the bombs. But he was actually flying the plane with the bomb site when he did that. When we were taking off and climbing the altitude for a mission, we'd get up kind of above the atmosphere, the haze, and above the clouds, the level of clouds. And clear from England, we could see the V-1 rockets take off. Shoot them off from over on the continent. That was a rocket that would shoot up in the air, and then it'd arch over and drop on England. But you could see the contrails of those going up, and they'd go up so far until they'd get up out of the kind of the atmosphere and humidity. But that was something to see. You could see those clear from England when they were taking off. We went after some of those rocket sites later on. Another consistent problem we had with our plane, I can't remember, I believe it was the number 3 prop. When you had full bomb load and full gas load and everything to the firewall on takeoff, that our number 3 prop would run away. And a lot of times you can't control them, but I'd grab the prop pitch control for that and get it calmed down. But boy, that was always worried us, because if you lost that sucker on takeoff, well, you're in trouble. But
We lived with that thing until we got shot up that one time real bad, and they had to change that engine out, and by golly, we got a new prop on it. So that was the end of that. Thank goodness. After we got up and we got our squadron assembled. Each of the four squadrons would get assembled, and all this time you were assembling, you were kind of heading your way, but then there was an exact time that our squadron had to assemble with our group, and that would be over a certain point in England, and Kelly would have to get that all calculated and tell us how fast to fly and so forth to slide in with that rest of the group. And then that group would have to go on, and it was over towards the coast someplace that you had to, your group had to slide into that bomb stream. I don't think you can imagine seeing 2,000 planes. You can see a stream of bombers as far both directions as you can look. Just kind of amazing, but they had to have that all calculated, so each bomb group slid into that bomb stream at the exact point at the exact time. They'd have to zigzag around and everything and get a certain distance and then calculate it so that they come into the bomb stream, or it caused a real mess if they didn't get that all done, and it was quite precise. I just thought of a couple more little tidbits. I'll throw them in here. Everything's out of order, but so what? When we didn't have a bombardier with us, we were going to bomb PFF, and they do it with a radar bomb sight, and there would be one bomb sight in the lead plane of all 40 planes in a group. And when we'd be come up to the bomb run, depending on what kind of a pattern they want, maybe we stayed together as a group, or if they wanted a wide pattern, the squadrons would spread out to the side, so they'd be a lot wider. And then as you went into the target, the lead bombardier would toggle his bombs, and the first bomb that went out was a smoke bomb, and you'd see that smoke bomb go down as soon as and then our armor gunners would be at the toggle switch, and he would toggle the bombs for your plane. So the first one would drop it, and then all the other 40 planes, 39 planes in the group, would toggle theirs. So then you'd have a wide pattern as the bombs went down. But that's the way what we did when we didn't have a bombardier. Another kind of a tidbit: you'd be on a bomb run and the flak was thick. You could look around all the squadrons and all the planes, and all the ball turrets were just scooting round and round and round as fast as they'd go. They'd go one way for a while and then go back the other way. Somebody had told them it was their theory that if they were turning fast enough, the flak would bounce off of them and not go through them. But I don't know whether that was true or not, but they were sure all going around when the flak was thick. I guess they thought we were pretty well trained, because we just took a couple little orientation flights around there to look the place over and make a few landings on that airstrip, and they had us up for a mission. I didn't go on the first mission because a new crew, they would get a seasoned pilot, from the group, and he would fly in the co-pilot seat, and they'd go on the first mission to let the pilot get oriented with a mission and see what all the problems were, and then we were on our own. So I missed that first mission, and I got in an extra mission with another crew later on, so I'd be caught up with our group. I just switched back to my old B-17 hat. It's getting pretty tired, but that's my lucky fishing hat, so I really hang on to that old baby. Thought of one more little tidbit I'd stick in here. I remember earlier I said that We didn't drink much at breakfast, but after you see what all equipment we put on, you can imagine what it'd be at 50 below zero, getting unhooked from all of that, and then hooking yourself up to a portable oxygen bottle back into the bomb bay where they had a little funnel where you're standing on that little catwalk back there. So I don't think there was hardly any missions I ever left my seat. I'd be in that seat for 10 hours without ever moving. Well, I'm going to start out here and see how I get along with starting with the first mission. As I told you before, I didn't fly on the first mission because they sent an experienced pilot along, so one of us would get one mission under our belt before they turned us loose. I'm going to kind of depend on Kelly's notes. He did a very meticulous job. And so I'll just start right here. It was 9th of March, 1945. Target Marshalling Yards, Frankfurt, Germany. Bombed visual. That means there were no clouds so we could see the target. Altitude 20,800 feet. First mission, excited as hell. Ward was to fly first mission as co-pilot on an experienced crew, but we all flew the first mission except Clem. Had an old pilot flying with us in Clem's place. Was so excited that I could hardly do anything. No flak until we got to the target. The first flak I saw was 7 bursts in a line about 75 to 100 yards in front of us. Frankly, it scared the hell out of me, and I crawled down just as far down in my flak suit as possible. This was the only flak which came near us. Okay, this is the map for their first mission. Right over here are the White Cliffs of Dover, and kind of tell you where you're at. This mission, they went in way up here. There's Amsterdam. They went in, flew east, and then came down to the target. I don't quite understand why they made that circle there unless it was to pick up a secondary target. But anyway, trying to see some of these little towns here. Up here's Ossenbruck. Over here's Dusseldorf. And here would be Frankfurt, but it doesn't have it marked in there. Coming back out, then there's Brussels, Antwerp. But they come on across here, and it was always a good feeling when you could see the White Cliffs of Dover. You thought you was pretty well had it made then, unless you were low on gas. Now all these areas here, those areas are all the flak areas you want to stay out of. Of course, every target, you can see there's probably a city under most of all of those. But they tried to plan a route to avoid all of those you possibly could. They come in across here and down between them and down, clear down. They got clear down closer to the target without going through over too many of those main flak areas. I'm going to have probably kind of little delays between some of these shots. That's so that I can overlap when I start the camera the next time, and if I look at them without having the skips in the tape. This is my first mission, and our crew's second mission. From here on out, I can refer to them by their mission numbers, and not mine. It's 10th of March, 1945. Target Marshalling Yards at Dortmund, Germany. Bomb PFF. That means they dropped the bombs by the lead plane with the lead bombardier with a radar bombing. And like I said, he would drop his first bomb went out was a smoke bomb, and then all the rest of the planes and the whole group would trigger their bombs at the same time when they saw that smoke bomb go. Altitude's 23,200. Flak, he's got is moderate. Our first mission as a complete crew. Clem along with us for the first time. Compass and radio compass went out and we couldn't find our group, so we tagged on with another group and completed the mission with them. Again, no flak except at the target. Wasn't quite as excited, but had a time navigating with part of my instruments out. Guess I was just scared, if not more so, when on the bomb run all that I could see up ahead was black clouds of flak bursting. It was really giving the other squadron hell. However, when we got to the target, the flak was off to our left. Saw London on the return. Got back to the base with the instruments I had available. Almost hit the field on the head, but was really sweating it out. Ward was complimented for completing the mission with another crew instead of aborting. March 11th, went on first 48-hour pass to London. Look out, London, here we come. That was Kelly's notes. I was put down a one-liner, but it was about the same. Dortmund, marshalling yards, missed our own group, so I went on our own with the Square K group. Had barrage flak, hit the group ahead of us, but missed us almost entirely. This is the map to our second, or call it our second mission. We come in from the north again, up north of Amsterdam, came across, on down, and Dortmund right there was our target. We come on down here. It looks like Clements and Months down in that area, and then we turned back west and came straight on out back to England. This is a briefing sheet I've got. It shows where the planes are. This was the lead squadron, and we flew in the high squadron on the right, and we were the second plane back on the left-hand side. We had a pilot named Pankow. He was from, I think it was McCook, Nebraska, but that guy always was having trouble. I don't know why. He could never keep up the squadron. He was lagging way back. And on one mission, he was lagging back so far, and as he kept losing altitude trying to keep up. I don't know what his problem was, but it was, he did it a lot of the times. He was so far back and so low that when we dropped our bombs, one of the bombs went through his left wing, right through the aileron, and cut it in two, but luckily it cut it on the side where the control wasn't, so he still had a half an aileron to fly at home. Well, I guess Kelly mentioned we were, after those missions, we were going to have a pass to London. And London, here we come. Well, to get to London, we had to go into Sudbury, which is just down the hill, a mile or so, mile and a half down the hill from where our base was. We get on a little English train there, a lot smaller than our trains, and each compartment had a door on it, so each compartment just opened up out on the platform, and about 2 rows of seats facing each other in each compartment. And then we'd ride that to, I believe it was Austin Pay, was the name of the place. It was a junction where we switched trains, and we went on into London to the main London station there. It was about 40 miles northeast of London. In London, they had several buildings renovated, big old buildings that they had quarters that you could bunk down. They just had beds and kind of a central bath and stuff, but you could usually always find a place to stay when you went in. Of course, London was all blacked out, and it was kind of hard to see and get around. You just see some little dim lights in the windows that were shaded from above, so they couldn't see anything from above. But you soon learn when you grabbed a taxi. To this day, I don't know how those guys drove in that dark and knew where they were going. But they had